Okay, so week 4 for April Fool's Day, thanks to Rachel, sent this lovely thing. Here's Lenin discovering that Alexander Kerensky has accidentally added him to the provisional government group chat. Lenin does not look happy about it.
Funny.
I am just going to check 1 second because somebody came in and I can't see that. Oh, it is Derek on the iPhone. Okay, that was just a note coming up. I just want to make sure there's nobody in the waiting room.
Yeah,
right.
that was a real coup to
Okay,
come up with this.
back to where's my sharing now here. Okay.
Where did you see it, Rachel? Like, where did you have this picture?
Here we go. Uh-oh, I just
On
lost.
Facebook. I'm friends with a lot of Russian history nerds, so
Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah.
So I love this. This is a great way to start, especially today being April Fool's Day. I was happy to have it. So today I'm going to be talking about the Family Code of 1918. And this was put together by Lenin and his cohorts. And it's amazing when you hear what all is in the Family Code of 1918. So it starts out with dealing with a lot of Russian life. So first of all, it made marriage a civil union, not religious. The church did not have to be involved, just a civil union. They wanted to get religion out of sort of your everyday life. Second, it legalized divorce and it streamlined the process. You didn't necessarily have to come up with a reason or file a lot of paperwork. If you needed to get divorced, you could be divorced. Women had a right to an abortion. Mind you, this is 1918 Russia. Private property was no longer the privilege of men, so that private property could be distributed amongst men and women. All children had equal rights, including children out of wedlock. So when you left property, it had to be left equally to children that you had in a marriage or you didn't have in a marriage. This one's unbelievable. If a woman didn't know the father of her child, all sexual partners would share child support. So if you had sex with her and she had a kid, you're going to be paying if you don't own up to whose child it is. Women were legally equal to men, which we've yet to pass the Equal Rights Amendment here in the United States, but women were completely legally equal to men. Women had equal access to all state jobs and received equal pay for equal work. And household chores were socialized. So they realized how important it was that if somebody had to stay home and make dinner and take care of the children, that was all made part of the workforce, and that was distributed equally between men and women, became part of that. So this was 1918. This is a pretty amazing document that was put together. And Lenin, his quote was, "The proletariat could not achieve complete freedom unless it achieves complete freedom for women." And I was just amazed by, the stand they were taking on women. Sadly to report, this did not continue. Stalin jumped in there after Lenin, and he ended all progress for women. He said women should only be realized as such in motherhood or as wives and housewives. In 1944, he imposed designations on women by how many children they had. And so you could become designated mother heroine if you had 10 children or more. And that was an award you would get if you could crank out 10 or more children. You were the mother heroine. I don't think I'd need heroin if I had 10 or more children. And then, of course, all liberal ideas of the Bolsheviks that they had put together were labeled immoral, anarchist, and petty bourgeois propaganda. So all these advancements made that were sort of resonated around the world, both in America and England, a lot of women were, covering all of this. But sadly, as Stalin came to power, all of it disappeared and they just took away all the freedoms that women had. So I've done a very short thing this week because we were short on a discussion last week. So I just put up our questions for this week. How does the presence of Liberius illuminate the elements of Russian history that we haven't seen earlier? In these pages, Yuri kills a young white guard. How does this action affect our reading of the Doctor's character? To what extent does the frosted rowan become a central symbol of the novel? Love conquers all. Does Pasternak believe this? Does he have a reservation about love that his characters express? And we can certainly see plenty of reasons why the novel won the Banned Book Award in the Soviet Union, but are you finding reason why it has become a staple of the 11th grade curriculum in Russia today with Putin? And then I had to jump in because last week we really had very little discussion time, and I just was saying to Doc that when Vladimir Nabokov spoke about Zhivago in a 1967 Paris review, that Pasternak's melodramatic and vilely written Zhivago can be considered a masterpiece, or at least what journalists call great book, is to me an absurd delusion, as when hypnotized person makes love to a chair. He also considered the novel a sorry thing, clumsy, trite, and melodramatic, with stock situations, voluptuous lawyers, unbelievable girls, romantic robbers, and trite coincidences. I just thought that was worth touching on. We didn't get to that last week.
Nabokov accusing somebody of unbelievable girls?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, the writer of Lolita.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you see any kind of validity in what he's? I mean, he was a crabby guy, Nabokov, and he obviously thought a hell of a lot of himself as a writer. And I think one of the things that he tried to do, and since he became an American citizen and so forth, is that he tried to leave politics and really a lot of social issues, other than in Lolita, like pedophilia, but that's a different, uh, story. But he wanted to leave them. He thought of literature as being um, an apolitical topic. So I think that's part of what he had a problem with here. But is there anything that he said that you would agree with, or do we just sort of say, oh, well, that's Vladimir. That's Vladimir for you?
I, Doc, I can see some of it just in, I'll call it the way my mind has worked for the last 4 or 5 decades, where there's just so much out there, and I keep going through. There's something for everybody in this novel, where you can pick out almost anything through all the various chapters. So I can get that somebody with a more analytical mind, might view so much of it that way and truly believe it, as opposed to, just wanting to be an ass. So
Yeah.
The trite coincidences, I would agree with. I mean, just think in a country that big with so much chaos, the fact that all these people keep running into each other and overlapping and finding these, random relatives, it is unbelievable. I mean, it's fiction, but that did bother me too.
And I guess the scope of the story is so huge that I could see the melodrama, like, not necessarily, I don't see it as a bad thing, but it's I would almost consider the story an epic. Like the scale that it takes over, the geography that it kind of covers, that anything that is that epic in that sense of the word might read as melodramatic to somebody who is much more focused and kind of a more individualist perspective. Because while it's in Yuri's head a lot, it jumps to other characters, and it kind of goes to like the Russian condition as a whole instead of a much smaller, personal individual narrative, I guess.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, because particularly in this section where we left off last week with Yuri being kidnapped by the Liberius's group, and then the next thing we're off with Galuzina in another complete story that is, and suddenly I'm like, what happened? I don't know any of these people. Who are these people? Why are we talking about them? And he's going off on a whole thing. I mean, it all ties together because everybody we meet there as it goes through ends up becoming, important later. But he does sort of jump around to different things. And I do think the epic thing, it is a sweeping story covering so many things. And I haven't read enough of Nabokov to know exactly. I mean, I've read Lolita, and other than that, I haven't read his other books to know what he thinks is great writing.
He's a very, I mean, he's very stylistically motivated. Let's put it that way. I mean, I think, and especially since we're reading a translation, we really have to be dealing more with content than form, right? And I think with Nabokov, you're dealing much more with form. And that's one of the appeals of his writing is, so therefore somebody, plus, I mean, he certainly Lolita was his blockbuster, but, you know, I also think he had enough of an ego from what I've read about him to know that um, Dr. Zhivago blew Lolita out of the water in terms of its popularity and its sales. So Charles, you have anything to say about Nabokov?
You unmute yourself.
Unmute. Yeah.
There we go.
You missed some great comments. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know if you're like I am, forget them already. So it's too late.
What I was going to say, what I was saying was that in addition to the other things, he threw in some poetry and symbolism and Russian history. It's an all-encompassing work of art.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a nice way to put it. Yeah. Okay. So now that we've taken care of Nabokov, where do we want to go tonight? Does anybody have a point you'd like to make about, because this is a pretty heavy duty portion of the book. I mean, that Rowan Tree chapter was sort of blows me away. But yeah, Greg, what's up?
Just sorry to jump back, but Ginny, you gave lots of interesting little timely facts, and I appreciate the brevity. My key question is, from Lenin to Stalin. That's a huge departure from what drove that at a time when the rest of the world was embracing and modernizing and taking full advantage of equal rights.
I think that's Stalin decided that the family unit was really, really important because Russia had been pretty much decimated. So if women were all going to be in the workforce, then who was going to be having children? Hence the mother heroine for 10 or more. Russia had to sort of be repopulated.
Okay.
So I think he felt in order to repopulate the country, we couldn't have women all working and not make child life important. Maybe Rachel might have a little more insight. I know you have a lot more history background. We don't have Kendall here to throw more of that, but from what I read, I felt that was definitely part of it, was to repopulate the country.
Even though, in fact, he had eliminated millions.
Well, yes, he was so busy killing them on one hand, he had to replace them on the other.
Yeah. Rachel, you have anything to add here? We're putting you on the spot.
They just there was the 1905 revolution, then there was World War I, then there was the Russian Civil War, then there was World War II. And I think the number of Russians killed was upwards of 20 million people in World War II.
Yes.
So you have there were no men left in the country at all. And I mean, it actually tragically continued to this day between the Chechen wars and all of the wars that happened in the 20th century. But it was partially Stalin being batshit crazy, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then partially just needing people, because people have always been Russia's, they have all the people they can throw at them. We don't have any other natural resources, so need to repopulate.
Good answer. Thank you.
But weren't rights taken away from men as well?
Yeah, but men can't have babies.
Weren't rights taken away from men as well about different versions of political speech and other activities? So it wasn't just women who were being limited.
No, everybody was being repressed.
Yeah, but I mean, women were facing those same exact changes. Women were being repressed politically as well, but they had these additional repercussions faced on them about abortion being illegalized and the recognizing the dual burden of them, because then they were expected to work and being in the home, and it was not great situation for them in general. Yeah.
It had to be hard to have had all those rights and then suddenly had them all taken away. It must have been really tough. Good.
Not going to comment on that.
I was just
given
going to say, we don't have to go any
environment.
further than that.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah.
imagine having rights like that and then having them taken away. It's unbelievable.
And honest to God, when I, thought about doing this book, I had no idea how relevant it was going to be. I mean, like, how
Yeah.
could you?
I couldn't get over that, this kind of thing, was happening in 1918 and it's taken America years to pick up on half of this stuff and still it's not all there.
Yeah.
And be
Yeah.
rolling them back now. I mean,
And right, and to be
Yeah.
going backwards as well. Yep.
Yeah.
It's
You
those,
bet.
it's those who feel they are losing the power when they come into power, trying to regain it, right?
Yeah. So, what's on your mind? I mean, I've got, a whole damn sheet of questions. So, but is there something you'd like to bring up?
I think Yuri changes the most in this part of the book.
Okay, continue on, Jennifer.
I think this is when he goes from being he's totally idealistic in the beginning and feels that he is above all of this. And
Mhm.
when he gets basically kidnapped, right, by the Red Army, he's forced to live what he was able to judge before, I guess. Is that
Yeah.
Yeah, say a little more about that.
well, like when he kills the young soldier, the white Russian.
Yeah, like,
I mean, that's something if you had told him in the beginning of the book he was going to do that, he might have told you, I would never do that. I'm an intellectual. I'm an example of war makes us do crazy things, I guess, that you don't realize what you're capable of until you're in that situation.
That's a good point. Very good. Other thoughts about that?
He can't make up his mind about anything. He's back and forth. I'll stay here. I'll go there. I'll go back home again. I love her. No, I love her. No, I love her. I'll help this guy. I won't help that guy. He's got some decision to make.
It's
Yeah.
a hard contrast from nursing the other white Russian back to health. And even though the guy's like, I'm still going to kill you if you let me go, basically.
Yes.
But he still does it, maybe to atone. I don't remember the order, which came first, but it's just an interesting dichotomy between taking the life of one and saving the life of another.
Yeah.
I think it was interesting that actually, he didn't shoot him to kill him. He was busy shooting at the tree and the people ran in front of his bullets, more or less. And he was appalled that he'd hit somebody, which I thought was interesting. Like, he wasn't allowed to fight, as doctors weren't supposed to carry a gun and fight. So he shouldn't have had a gun. But then he decided he was like being a wimp for not having a gun and he should have a gun and be firing. But then he said, well, I can't be firing straight up in the air. That's stupid, but I'll try to shoot at this tree. And then he hits somebody. I mean, I like what Charles says. He can't make up his mind. I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm not going to try to kill somebody, but I end up shooting people anyway by mistake. And then how, clever that the bullet hit the amulet that he was wearing, deflected. So the guy wasn't dead that he thought was dead, but then nursing him back to health. And then also all his conversations with Liberius where they debate what they're doing are fascinating to me. And I see that as sort of an interesting thing. He thinks Liberius is nuts and always saying, things are going to be better. And he wants to know what happens to their family. And Liberius only cares about the war itself. And that's another interesting thing that Yuri has. Yuri's interested in his family, his wife and his children, and also Laura. He wants to know about both of those groups. Whereas Liberius only wants to know about, are we going to win? And I'm going to be totally positive about this, that the whites are going to be driven back. By the way, in the very first few pages of this section, did you notice they were fighting with Kolchak, who Maria Bakarova, who I talked about last week, that's who she came back to join up with, was Kolchak. He was a real person, and that's whose regiment she joined and then got captured by the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
It's Derek. Hi. Is my microphone working? Yeah. Hi. What section does this part 4 of our class go up to? Because I'm not trying to get too far ahead of it, but I do have some.
I know you, and you're very good to do that because you know what would happen if you went ahead.
That's correct. I would get banned from session
It would
5.
be- yeah,
I
sure.
will say though, just to this point, I'm sort of, and even a little bit maybe further than what Charles is saying, like this Dr. Zhivago in no way, shape, or form is like bullying me over as a human. Like I don't get the whole, I don't understand why everybody thinks he's so great and this, that, the other thing. Like he does literally nothing for me. I feel like he ventures only a couple steps into each direction and then stops there. I have very, very little love for Dr. Zhivago as a human. I just want to say that it's going to get worse in session 5, but right now I can tell you, I
You
have no
almost,
love for Dr.
Derek,
Zhivago.
you almost had a violation right there. Almost had there. Okay. I could consider it as such, but I'm not going to because that's the kind of person I am. But anyway, that's a really interesting point, I think.
Well, it just got me so fired up. And then the other, well, this might be session 5 too. All right, never mind. I'll bring it off in session 5. That's fine.
495. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
It's just to answer your question, it's just after the long discussion about religion and everything about Mary Magdalene, and was Mary Magdalene another Mary, and so that's kind of where I think there's one more chapter after that. But
I was thinking about this, like everybody I think is meant to think like he got kidnapped and that was so bad. But honestly, like being a doctor and helping people, that was like his most fulfilling, like that was what he was all about, right? I mean, so yeah, he got kidnapped and taken away from everything, but really he got thrust into just doing what it is that he like was like his like core, right? So I don't know how much he did hate it, honestly. I mean, obviously
consent is
go
a
ahead.
thing.
What's that?
What'd you say?
Consent is a thing.
This section ended where he has read Tanya's letter after discussing things with Laura, and he collapses and goes unconscious. He clutches his chest, feels faint, and hobbles away. And he's read Tanya's letter again about, and then also that's what he's done. He's read her letter, and then he collapses after reading her letter while she says, they'll never see each other again. That's the end of section 4 that we read.
So I guess what we would say is that Zhivago does not fulfill a lot of what we might expect in a traditional, if you want to use that, traditional heroic character, right? I mean, but he has flaws.
100%.
Thank you. It's always good to see the little iPhone light up there, Derek.
I'm driving, not quite in Thailand. I was in Vermont.
But just be careful, will you please? So anyway, but the question is, I mean, Derek doesn't find much love for Zhivago. So if you're looking at the characterizations in this book, how many characters could you find Pasternak's love for?
Love?
Yeah, I mean, like he's the creator. He's the creator. He wants to convey certain elements of, about our existence through his characters, right? So is there anyone who sort of stands taller than other characters in terms of, say, heroic qualities?
Tanya? Does Tanya really do anything bad?
Well, okay, but
she kind of does the right thing.
He does. I think Tanya's somebody he definitely treats with respect and likes her. She's forgiving and also understanding. I mean, her leaving,
Yeah, but
her becoming friends.
she's a touch submissive too, though, and that irks me also. Like, I don't know. To a degree, I don't. Yeah, forgiving. I mean, I don't know. She writes that kind of wimpy note that's like, oh, and then she becomes best friends with her, and like is all buddy with like, I don't know. That drives me nuts too. Maybe I'm just edgy tonight or something.
I do think that
No, I
because
think you're yourself. That's probably what the problem is. Okay.
I think part of it's because Yuri is such a person with so many facets to him. His, medical side, his poetry side, his love of nature, all these that she realizes that one woman or one person can't meet all his needs and that she knows how they relate to each other. But Laura gives him something completely different from what she can. And not everybody could be understanding about that. Believe me, it wouldn't be my cup of tea to be like, let's be friends with this woman that's with my husband too. You know, but I think she sees Yuri as somebody who's so complex and has so many different thoughts. Being a writer and a poet makes him a little bit different from all these other people that you come across in the book that are, and Laura's more like him because she's had a wider life experience because of what's happened to her. I mean, sort of when they had that whole thing where they talk about, he asks her about her loves and to tell him everything about her life, what happened, him, like he talked about the things he was jealous about. Like, I'm not jealous about this and I'm not jealous about that, but I am jealous about this and this. That was sort of a interesting section to me.
I think so much of this has to do with the sign of the time, and that's part of what I like about the history that Jenny and Kendall have brought in, because I find it hard to empathize with Yuri, probably similarly as Derek, because I've never been an any port in the storm kind of a guy. I've never been, put in the position where if I had to fire a gun, I'd aim at the tree so that obviously he was looking like he was participating with the other folks. And therefore, I'm finding it hard to condemn Yuri.
Yeah.
At the same time, Jenny, I completely agree with you that he's trying to find himself, and it seems like the other people know him better than he knows himself. And that's why, so many of the characters coming in are, I'll say, helping to define him.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing for the book that we don't entirely find him a sympathetic character. I mean, there's a certain selfishness in him. He's got a big ego, and I mean, yes, he's in love with Laura, and he's in love with his wife and his family, and it's not like that's impossible. But I think it rubs most of us not so much as the wrong way as, well, unconventionally, and therefore if there's something unconventional, we're less likely maybe to embrace a character,
But
right?
he was an unconventional man living in very unconventional times.
Excellent point. That's worth a table slap there. All right, okay, don't get too excited. Just you have to deal with it, right?
Don't forget
Whoa!
Oh,
Whoa!
thank you.
Fireworks,
Oh my
Dan.
God, excellent
That was
job there,
fancy.
Greg. This
Technology can be fun.
Don't forget too that a lot of this mirrors Pasternak's life. He had a mistress and a wife,
Yes.
and he stayed with his wife till the day he died, and he stayed with his mistress till the day he died. And I think some of this is wishful representation that his own wife had been a little more understanding. She was not very understanding about this situation, but he could not give up, Olga, and he didn't give up Zenania either. So he's talking about something he's living. himself. I thought this section, it's on page 4. Oops, I have to see my 401.
Yeah.
I have to put my light here because I can't read with that light. That really defines how Yuri's so different. He's once again arguing with Liberius about stuff. And it's 3/4 of the way to that page. He says, the remaking of life. People who can reason like that may have been around, but they've never known life, never felt its spirit, its soul. For them, existence is a lump of coarse material, not yet ennobled by their touch, in need of being processed by them. But life has never been a material, a substance. It is, if you want to know, a continually self-renewing, eternally self-recreating principle. It eternally alters and transforms itself. It is far above your and my dim-witted theories. And that's sort of a pretty heavy statement. He'd been talking prior to that about the ends justifying the means, about the remaking of life and the world. But that's a pretty big statement to make. I mean, I read that over several times about life being something that's self-renewing. So he's got a completely, this sort of expresses, I felt this section, his outlook is so different from other people. Like some people think of life as something concrete, and his thinking of something more spiritual.
And fluid.
And right, and ever changing.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I mean,
and theory is not life, and that's the other part, particularly with the communists. It's one thing in theory to talk about what you think life is like socialism sounded like the answer to everybody's troubles, but in practice, it was not. It was not successful at all.
Yeah. On 476, Laura is talking to Yuri about Strelnikov. And I think this points to something that you just mentioned, Ginny. Okay, let's see. It's sort of at the end of the first paragraph. The same handsome, honest, resolute face, the most honest of any I've ever seen in the world. Not a trace of showing off, a manly character, a complete absence of posturing. He was always that way and has remained that way. And yet I noticed one change and it alarmed me. I think this is like at the core of it. It was as if something abstract had entered into that look and discolored it. A living human face had turned into the embodiment, the principle, the portrayal of an idea. My heart was wrung when I noticed it. I realized it was the consequence of the powers whose hands he had given himself into, sublime but deadening and merciless powers, which someday would also not spare him. That's a really, well, it's, I think it's one of the most profound statements that Pasternak makes, sort of as it's, and it's within this conversation that Yuri and Lara are having. I mean, it's not like this, he sticks it out here as in a philosophical moment. I mean, she's just saying, this is the problem.
But that's an awful lot to see in a glance to make that interpretation. So her perspective has to come from a lot more than what he just looked like in a second.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is something that she saw obviously growing, I guess, over time, right? Because, I mean, they started as teachers, right? In a remote.
He was a fabulous teacher. I mean, he has pupils in the town that just, rave about how great he was. I also think it's interesting here, too, the sentence that follows where it says, it seemed to me that he was marked and that this was the finger of doom. And this made me think about in the movie, Strelnikov has a scar that runs all the way across his face. He gets hit in that first conflict in the 1905 revolution and gets scarred. And it seems like they've taken the literal, putting a mark on him in the movie to make him different, sort of bring that about. Whereas in the book, he doesn't have this scar. He isn't marred. He doesn't, he doesn't suffer a horrible facial injury when he's in that first section, because he wouldn't have hesitated to tell us that if that was the case, since he didn't have any trouble telling us that poor man without his arm and his leg, strapped to his back, crawling across the tundra.
Yeah, that was grim.
That was very grim.
Do you want to, I mean, this could be a chance because Ginny just sort of put us in this direction. But we could take a look at Derek. You're not to be taking a look at the book at this point if you're driving. Okay, please.
Got it.
All right. But I was thinking about that to me that the Rowan Tree chapter is, like, to me, almost like the center of the book. There's so damn much there. So I thought maybe we could take a closer look at it. Like on, well, it's pretty much starts on 419.
You got me looking up Rowan Tree, and
Yeah, what did you find out?
well, it's got a lot of cultural significance and background, so it's not just an isolated tree in the book. It's
Yeah.
a lot of a depth behind it, in addition to the interpretation of that comes of Laura and embracing arms and the fruit and all that kind of stuff.
So what did you find out about it, Charles?
Not much more than what I said, but it's a literary reference that's used elsewhere by other people.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So once we get, so on 419, just take a look at the initial description of it, beginning with the paragraph that starts at the way out of the camp in the forest, and through the next paragraph, which ends with, and she smiled. Now, if you have the book there, that's a help, and otherwise, you'll have to be patient while we look at it. And I guess what I'm going to is like, okay, there within this rather long chapter, there are references to it. And he never really gets away entirely from the Rowan Tree. And I'm trying to sort of set that, how that is acting sort of symbolically in this part of the book.
Charles, I looked it up too right before. It said it's a symbol of resilience.
Okay.
And it was something about how it survives the harsh Russian winter. It's in Asia too, which makes sense based on the geography of where we are at this point in the book.
Yes. So you're saying that the Rowan Tree, using the Rowan Tree as a symbol of resilience is certainly something that we could connect then to the Russian people in this area of Russia at the time. What specifically do you see in the description that would lend itself to this kind of positive sense that, say, a Russian reader would have with the mention of a Rowan Tree? Like we did, we have to look it up, right? But a Russian, it's a tree that would be familiar to many Russians, especially those in the more Asian sections of Russia. So what do you see there? As you know, I mean, I'll blather on.
Right. It blooms all year round, or it has leaves all year round. So it's one of the few things that's not barren, and birds and other things are able to feed off it because it has leaves all year. So it's something that renews all year round, as opposed to other trees that go fallow in the winter and are, no leaves and are barren. This is like an oasis of life in the middle of nowhere.
It's very much like he describes it like a mother.
Exactly.
Oh,
giving
very good.
nourishment.
Okay, the two of you got slapped for that one. Okay.
Could it also be like Mother Russia? Like this is, you can have all of this conflict and these people in charge and these rules, we see the rules change a lot, when they get back into the towns, but this is a constant. And this is something that politically they can't change, that this Rowan Tree will always be there to give nourishment and shelter.
Well, and there is, in the second paragraph, there is a reference to a maternal
Mhm.
right? I mean, some living intimacy was established between the birds and the tree, as if the rowan saw it all, resisted for a long time, then surrendered, taking pity on the little birds, yielded, unbuttoned herself, and gave them the breast like a nurse to a baby. Well, what can I do with you? Go on, eat, eat me, feed yourselves. And she smiled. You know, Ginny was saying before, you know, the rest of us got together, she was saying that, because one of my questions was, you know, all right, so what on earth would uh, cause the Russian school systems to include this book as, you know, part of their curriculum? And, you know, because you could find all, you know, obviously it's so many reasons why they might question it. But, you know, Ginny mentioned that it was the resilience of the people, you know, regardless of their political, you know, leanings, beliefs. And, you know, I mean, it's, and here, I mean, this is a tree. That's, I mean, this is the kind of tree, I mean, like, I'm a sort of crazy ass gardener, but it's the kind of a tree that you have to have, right? You have to have something with that strength and that ability to withstand really hot weather. Really, you know, I mean, it's like that's the tree you need, because you have to be prepared for those trees without that kind of resilience to die,
Life
right?
can't go on if there aren't trees that, you know, I'm all life, you know, the birds would die if you didn't have something that would get you through the winter. If anybody's watching that Tom Hanks Americas, like it's the one thing I've learned is no matter how desolate these places are, there's a catch there that's something that keeps life going, that eventually provides them with water or food, even in the most harshest environments, even if it's only rain once every 10 years. Um,
Yes,
keeps
yeah,
life going. And I feel like the tree is the symbol of life going on and how resilient the Russian people are, and they will keep, you know, working to survive. But there is that hope. It's also, I think, a symbol of hope, the tree. And he certainly, by going to it towards the end of this chapter, when he sees that, you know, the branches as Laura's arms reaching for him, of hope that he can be reunited with her and
yeah,
his
yeah.
family.
I kind of saw in this one paragraph from Some Living Intimacy to And She Smiled, that paragraph summarizes his entire section with the Forest Brotherhood. Like, he gets picked up, some living intimacy with the forest, with the Brotherhood, pulled in, resisted, fights with them for a while, stays there, and
Right.
eventually it's the Rowan that lets him get out, because he says, oh, I'm going to go pick some berries, I'm going to, that's how he was finally able to escape the Forest Brotherhood. So that would be aligned with it feeling pity for him and opening its breast and giving him the berries, which then let him leave to Laura's branching arms. This kind of just that one little
You
paragraph.
know, sometimes, some days we're just so damn smart. You are. I mean, I'm going to give you another table slap.
I thought like Rachel, it provided some great subterfuge for him to make such a plausible escape. And then even the part where I think they referred to it as a hare, I remember it as a rabbit, that, you know, that's hiding in that.
Yes,
I
and
was
that
like,
gives rise to that folk poem or folk song, which actually Pasternak wrote. It's not a traditional.
oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, I think by the same token, you know, he plays with us a lot, and never makes us, I don't think, particularly comfortable. You know, I mean, we'll start thinking a certain thing, because after, you know, this really kind of lovely discussion about this tree, you know, he then comes to this platform, and what we learn on 420. In this place, on a cold gray morning, the death sentence was carried out on the 11 men found guilty of the conspiracy and the two moonshining orderlies. You know, so there is that that almost well, you know, it's a kind of idealistic view of that natural, the nurturing elements of nature versus the reality, the cold reality of war, you know, and he's juxtaposing that. Yeah, Jen, you were thinking something like
No, I
that.
was thinking also it also represent a constant in a time of tremendous change and upheaval.
And-
Like that tree continues to stand.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. What would you within these pages? I mean, I found that Pamphile was a really interesting minor character. I mean, he sort of becomes a major minor in this particular chapter. How would you explain why Pasternak included him? And he, I mean, he takes up a lot of room, right? Like starts, I think he starts around 4:15.
The one with the mental health issues, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
I saw, was telling Peter this before we got started too. I was fascinated by the idea that Pasternak at this time was writing about when they asked the three most important things they needed to work on for the doctors, and the third one was mental health. And he
Yeah.
said people need help. And I'm thinking, here they are way back thinking about that, and yet it seems like today we're just cottoning on mental health being something that people need help with, and to acknowledge it and not act like it's, you know, some big stigma, but it's something that people need help with. But the whole idea of post-traumatic stress with Pamphile and the problems he was having gives you another completely different aspect of the war, like a family man who's concerned about his family, but he's losing it in a sort of the way that described his hallucinations and his flights that he's having. And at first, Yuri's not even going to go to him. Yuri gets distracted and goes somewhere else when he's supposed to go see him, you know, and doesn't see him. And so it is interesting, you know, the whole section with him.
I thought that he was included just to show the personal toll that war would take, and that it could lead you to do things that seem unfathomable. That if he was so worried about his family, and then I like Derek Redhead too, but we're done with his whole storyline in this chunk of work, right?
Yes.
Right. So we know that he kills his family
Yes.
to
Yes.
prevent anyone else from killing them. I mean,
Yeah.
that's unhinged, but again, he never would have done that had he not been alive in these times.
Of course. Of
Well, had
course.
he not seen that guy come with his one arm and his one leg tied to his back and sent crawling, and he thought they could do this to my wife and children. Like when you see the amount of cruelties, I think, you know, Russia has a long, long history of doing incredibly horrible things to people. You know, when I was reading, I read the 600-year history of the Romanovs. I mean, there was a thing where they roped an entire village and then pulled them into a frozen lake and, you know, put them all under and drown them. They see a lot of horror, and that particular horror was so awful that he thought his family would be better off dead than to let them experience something like that. That was a pretty gruesome thing, as Peter was saying, for something that didn't touch a lot on the horror of war. He suddenly, in this section, is
In
like
this section, he really
telling
does.
us horrible stuff.
And
That's like the stuff
especially,
of nightmares, that guy crawling around.
yeah, and juxtaposed between like Yuri, like, oh, should I just kill him now so to put him out of his misery? Well, it's really not. It's the same exact line of reasoning that both Yuri takes with that individual, but also Pamphile takes with his family, right? They're going to die anyway. Let's put them out of their misery. It's just, you know, you cut out the intermediary steps for his family. So like you can see how somebody that's in that environment, seeing that every day, just sees, well, it's the same thing. Not saying it is. I'm just explaining kind of like
Well, no, I mean, you have to, yes.
where his head is at, like juxtaposing those two thoughts.
And it's, you know, it's not something that hasn't been done before. I mean, you know, you had Goebbels during World War II, right? I mean, he took out his, was it he? Who was the guy, the Hitler, who poisoned himself and his family before the United States and the Allies won?
I
I
mean,
think that might have been Goebbels that did that. I was just reading a book that had that storyline in it, and I think it was him.
Could it
Yeah.
have been Himmler? I mean, Goebbels was
Himmler.
huge atrocities, but could it have been Himmler too?
Might have been Himmler, yeah. But the idea is, okay, for his own reasons, he got, he decided, okay, what was it? What is in store for me now and my family? So he killed them,
A
and
way of taking control,
yes, yeah, sort of the ultimate,
right?
yeah, the ultimate control, yeah.
And again, in the story with the revolution and the wars, there's so
Goebbels.
little personal,
Yeah, okay.
there's so little personal control. All this, you're a victim of the history in which you are living, and there's so much that's happening that's beyond your control. Well, that was something that in his warped mind was in his control.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
an interesting point. I think it goes to some of Derek's frustration with the character. Like, agency is a huge thing, I think, in this book, and not many of the characters have it.
Mm.
I don't think Yuri has much of it at all, partially on his own, partially because of the circumstances, which is also why he's kind of waffling, because he doesn't have the agency there. Lara doesn't have much agency at all. Like, there are very few characters that actually, I mean, Strelnikov is probably one of the only ones so far. Maybe Liberius to some extent, and maybe the jerk-faced lawyer in the beginning might too. I'm blanking on his name. But like, yeah, but like, I think that agency is a big thing, and it's for such a long book with a lot of characters. There's not much of it going around.
It's a really good point. Yeah.
It's really only the people who are high up in the military, but you only have agency as long as your team is winning,
Right.
right?
What's
Yeah.
amazing too, I just happened to on the page across from the thing where they're shooting those prisoners, where the one guy is, begging for his life. The young
Yes.
guy is like, "Don't kill me, please. I'm young. I want to live." All of that, and yet other people are thinking it's better to be dead than to go through this. Whereas he's seen a lot of the horror, but he still wants to live, and he's
Mhm.
fighting for his life. Well, Pamphil is saying, it's better for his family to die. But you're right. I mean, Goebbels poisoned his wife and 6 children and then killed him.
Maybe this is where it comes full circle, but this part isn't, I don't get the overwhelming thing that this is Russia and what they're going through. I feel like that could be any wartime story in any book. So the Yuri that is maybe Pasternak being, he's writing on the pages, is Pasternak sort of not really going down the, like, I gotta be honest, like, I got a better sense and visuals from like what's going on in London from Oliver Twist and Tale of Two Cities than I do, and maybe just because the sheer size of what goes on in Russia. Like, I don't know who's fighting who and what sides everyone is on. I mean, everything is like a shade of each predecessor or the thing that comes after. So it's hard kind of to not get confused, I think, whereas like who's fighting who and what's going on. And I think that maybe there's some dead ends or like loose ends that never really get tied up in his book, which is what makes me feel like I'm not even sure anything political had something to do with the book being banned, unless that's exactly what they said. But like, I don't even know whose side he's on, right? Like,
Could that be?
Well, okay, you've brought up, as usual, a plethora of good ideas there, Derek. And I like kind of like the last statement that you made, because I think it's very reflective of, in my mind, one of the strengths of the novel is like, whose side is he on? Right? I mean, so what bugs you about that, not knowing what sides he's on? And do you, I mean, do you, Derek, do you think that he is more on someone's side than another person's side?
no, I don't think it at all. I think that he doesn't even, he's so trying to do two things at once that both gets lost in the like muddle. Like, they're all, that's what I think. He's trying to tell this love story. I think I said it like session 1. Like, you could just read this as just a straight up love story too, not knowing all the cool historical stuff. And obviously we've got some brainy people on these calls, and we always get the context and like the full, all the the entire picture. But I don't. I think he's trying to do two things at once, and I feel like they kind of both get lost in doing so. But
Okay.
maybe that's another point. I don't know whose side he's on. Just answer
Well, okay.
it straight up.
That makes the novel more complex, right?
It does. It would be easy if he had, if we knew exactly what he was thinking. That's what makes it interesting. But I think the other thing, Derek made a comment about it. It could be a war novel in anywhere else, but I don't think it could, because of the fact that in this novel, don't forget that Russia itself is like a third participant in the war. The vastness of it, the cold of it, the snow of it. It's, not every place where a war takes place is like Russia. I mean, where the snow is feet deep and that
No, true. And that's why I said maybe the sheer size of Russia and what went on then is just throwing me off,
Think about what Kendall said at the beginning. What is it, like 11 time zones? And how vast from Moscow to Vladivostok this country is? And you're trying to fight a war. No wonder nobody knows what's going on. It's a wonder any group can organize what's happening, because the country is so vast. But I feel like he makes it so that a third party to this whole thing is the weather, the Russia countryside itself, the vastness of it, the cold, the bitter cold of it.
General,
and how harsh the winter is. It adds, it's like a third thing. You're not just fighting each other, you're fighting the weather and the ground conditions and where you're trying to get to. You're not near anywhere at any point. They could march for days and not see anybody. All
I
these
keep
women
saying
are
to myself,
following this.
I keep saying it's winter again. Like it's like spring for like a paragraph. It's winter
Right.
again. Like it's constantly bitterly cold with a blanket of ice and snow on everything. Yeah.
Well, what do they have? Like 2 months of spring in the, in the worst parts of Russia? They're lucky if I guess they even see that. But it is, I feel like the weather and the vastness is such a huge part of affecting everybody's life. Like first we hated the city because the city was too congested and nowhere to go. So we moved to the countryside where we could live our lives and grow food and be into it. But even that turns on you once it turns cold and you run out of food and there's nothing to eat. And just the rowan tree left out there for you as hope.
in my Russian military history class, we literally called it General Winter. Like it is almost its own character that you have to take into account when you're studying the outcomes of the military battles and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, think of how the winter did in
Napoleon
and Hitler.
They both never should have attacked because they, how large the Russian front is. You can't possibly cover it or live through the winter.
The other thing I was thinking about, Eric, was also that, I mean, you're right. I mean, we don't have the kind of blow by blow, like an explanation of, okay, so who exactly which plenty of political novels would include, who exactly were the White Russians? What exactly did they stand for? Okay, so then who exactly, well, we know who were the Bolsheviks? What did they stand for? And then what about these other groups like the Liberias? Well, they're yes, they're somewhere more, I suppose, like the point is we don't know this. We don't find out a lot of facts, and I think that that's pretty deliberate, because the more, first of all, it would make a really long book like War and Peace, but the other thing I think is that what we see is the sort of the clash of forces, the clash of human forces, of military forces, all seeking power, right? And if we get that, that I think makes the book more, it's an old expression, but sort of universal in that, okay, do we get enough? And do we get enough about the sides? Do we get enough to know that, yeah, I mean, there are some good things about people who we may believe are on the bad side, right? I mean, like Strelnikov, we can't condemn him, even though he burned villages, right? Well, I mean, you can condemn him, but I'm just saying that don't we have some evidence of um, his real belief, his idealism, right? And it's harder to condemn somebody who is idealistic, and we learn about it. So I think part of it is like, what does he give us? What does Pasternak give us about the characters, right? And what does he not tell us? What does he keep? What do we wish we knew more about in the characters? And that, I think, Derek, it creates uncertainty in the readers.
It goes back to Yuri himself and the comment before about his going back and forth. He was born into wealth, was trained as a with means, but yet his work was in helping people, and he sees both sides and is torn by what he was brought up to be and what he wants to be and what he sees the need to be. So it's a conflict that goes on and on.
Yeah.
I thought that with talking about getting to know people on page 436, there's a thing there where they're talking about Laura. And
Oh,
first
yeah.
of all, I thought it was lovely written, but it was sort of understanding people. It says Laura's left shoulder had been opened as a key is put into a secret door of an iron safe built into a closet. Her shoulder blade had been unlocked by the turn of a sword. In the depths of the revealed inner cavity, the secrets kept by her and her soul appeared. Strange towns she had visited, strange streets, strange houses, strange expanses drew out in ribbons, in unwinding skeins of ribbons spilling out in bundles. And then he goes, oh how he loved her, how beautiful she was. That whole idea of like the knife wound opening and then revealing her inner characteristics, once again showing she's way more layered also, just like Yuri is. You sort of have the Yuri life of I'm wealthy, I went to school, I became a doctor, I did my doctor thing and moved along, but really in my heart I want to be a poet, and I'd really rather be writing and doing poetry and thinking about things like that. And then you have Laura, who on the other hand lived a life where she was exploited at a very young age, had horrible things happen to her, but she had a lot of layers to her life. And then marrying Strelnikov or Pasha as he was in those days, and sort of having this wonderful marriage that got ruined because Pasha couldn't handle it and leaves her. And how her life had to be so strange, knowing that her husband was only miles, sometimes, minutes away, and had no interest to see her and her child.
Well, and was attacking
and was bombing the village, right?
Bombing where she lived, right? I mean,
yeah.
This thing about spilling out all the layers of her life as well,
Yes.
and his life. I felt like they both had all these different layers to their life brought on by the war and the weather and everything. I mean, there were so many vast things going on in their lives that they couldn't be simple people because the times weren't simple. Anyway, that was just another section I thought was beautifully written, despite what Nabokov says. I like the way you wrote that.
No, it was. It is. This takes me back to something that we were talking about before, just in terms of characterization, and like Tonya is, to me, the old, God knows it's the oldest description of types of characters: flat versus round, right? Round character. I mean, we've given so many reasons why Yuri is a round character. I mean, he's complicated. It's hard to be able to zero in on him from at any given moment, because it's sort of like, well, wait a minute, you're in love with this woman, Lara. You're in love with your wife. You love your kids. You love your father-in-law. Um, you know, sometimes you just have to make tough decisions, right? You can take that attitude towards the guy, right? Um, but he's complex. And as Jenny's been talking about the layers of somebody like Lara. Um, but it seems like, I mean, I'm not sure how Tonya works. I mean, part of me wants to say, well, she's a flat character. She doesn't really develop. I mean, when you compare, and by develop, I mean, regression can be part of of development, right? But she's steadfast. She is the good wife, the good mother, and she keeps the family together, and she's all of those. But she lacks the complexity of a Lara or of a Yuri. Now, first of all, do you agree with that? But see, my bigger question is, okay, so why create a character that in so many ways she's so admirable, right? I mean, I have an issue. I mean, she's a little also quite down on herself. Oh, you don't love me. Oh, and it's not like there's not a reason. There is some reason for her to believe that. But how do you think she fits into that mix of characters? Because she's obviously, she never goes away. We'll have a letter here. We find out that, oh, they're being deported. By the way, I recently have figured out how to play Woody Guthrie's "Deportee" which is a great folk song. In case you want to look for more protest songs. But anyway, what do you think? What do you think about? I mean, she's important.
I think it's a value to be so steadfast and resolute in her direction, as a contrast to the other characters. So she's an anchor and doesn't need the flexibility that the others have to change their views. So she's the rock.
Okay.
She's also had a lot more stability in her life. I mean, she's known Yuri since they were little. She still has her father, and she's been with her father and her children, while Yuri's been off, was in the war, and then he came back again. Like Yuri'd been in and out of their lives, but she kept home life together for him. And then when they moved again, and he agreed to move when he didn't want to move, to the countryside, they moved out to Uriat and, to go to Varikino. And so I felt like she was always trying to make a stable home for everybody,
Yeah.
but she didn't have all the trauma. I mean, obviously she had trauma. They were wealthy and had a lot, and they ended up, having all their stuff taken away, but not the same kind of abuse, I guess, that Laura suffered. They had completely different lives. And so her ability to anchor and stay steadfast was sort of how she was able to, for her children, and for her father, to sort of keep everybody together. And then when she sends that letter, it's really sort of heartbreaking. Like she said, we're being deported. I'll never see you again. And she sort of resigned to that. He's been in and out of her life anyway for a lot of it, but she truly loves him. And that's kind of, that's kind of a really nice thought in all this horribleness that's going on. She's there and she cares. And she has two of his children, one of which he's never met and looks like she's not ever going to meet, the daughter that she's had.
So do you think it's like that? Go ahead.
She's also kind of the only purely altruistic character. Every decision she makes is for the good of everyone else.
Good point.
Lara and Yuri are a wee bit selfish with their passionate love. And I mean, just as Derek's saying, I also agree that I didn't think Yuri was so likable either. Yeah. But he's a bit selfish. I mean, later you find, like he thinks that his art is going to save Russia. Like, he's going to sit in a cabin and write poetry. Like, you kidding me? I mean,
I
you
also,
know,
you know,
making
you're
a big contribution while everyone is starving.
Her
So,
flatness and steadfastness to me just gives so much more depth to every other character by comparison, in essence, what
Yeah,
Jenny and Doc
and that's not to make a negative statement about her. I mean, I think she is one of the best. If you have to give like certain points for being a good soul, I'd probably give her the most points.
Tanya kind of always does the right thing, doesn't she?
Yes.
Yuri and Lara don't.
even
And
Laura, though, what I thought was really interesting was when he's kidnapped and he's been gone for 2 years and nobody knows what the heck happened to him. And Laura knew enough that he should go back to Varikino where his family was and find his wife and children. And instead, he goes to her apartment in Uriatin. And she's written a note saying, well, I went to your family's place because I'm sure that's where you should have gone, was to your wife and children, not to me. And instead, he went to her. And I was like, really? Like 2.5 years you disappear? You knew your wife was pregnant when you left, and you go to the girlfriend first and not to your wife? When even Laura, at least to her credit, thought, that's where he'll go. We'll go over there and meet him to tell him, they've gone away. That was
And when she's
and
there,
Laura
she
is-
straightens up.
right.
Yeah, I mean, she does like the full vacuuming and everything of the
Right. She's got the house all ready to go because, hey, this is where he's coming.
yeah.
And he doesn't.
Which leads us again. I think part of the power of him as a character is that he's not entirely likable, right? I mean,
Many flaws. He's a flawed hero.
he's
If
a
he's a hero at
very,
all.
very much a flawed hero, and like those of us, who went through Demon Copperhead, he's a kid, right? So in other words, you give him more slack, in many respects. Yuri, older, you know, quite a bit older, established in his life, respected profession, blah, 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 blah. So then that leads you the question, that point that, he goes to Laura's rather than, trying to find anything out about his family. So then that leads you is the love that he has, because I think, Pastor X plays with various definitions. Is it sort of a guilt love that Yuri has for his family? I mean, he thinks about, and usually when he dreams or thinks about them, they're not in a good place, right?
He's forgetting that his wife is pregnant. He has to keep reminding himself.
Right. That she had a baby. He was like, she's carrying
Right.
one child. Oh, she's like that lady. She'd be carrying 2 children because she's got the baby and
Like
Sasha.
he keeps forgetting that there was another child that he never met. And he reminds himself that happened a few times.
Yeah. And
That
also,
doesn't, I don't think that sounds like guilt to me. That just sounds like he has no, I don't think he does love them, honestly. I think he only tells himself that because of where he is and he's married and he doesn't want to feel bad about it, what he's doing. That's how I read it.
But don't forget, he was renouncing right before he got kidnapped. He was renouncing Laura and saying, I'm done with you and I'm
Yes.
going back to my wife.
yes,
He's having a baby and I need to be the family. And
Yes.
Laura, we're done. I will never see you again.
Yes.
And before he could get home, he gets kidnapped.
yeah,
It feels like his love for his family is pragmatic. Like, I think he does genuinely love his family.
I do too.
Laura feels more like he's in love with love or in love with the infatuation. Because he's always talking about her beauty, her, it's like bad middle school poetry sometimes when he's like talking about his love for this person, whereas like his love for his family is kind of rooted in something a little bit more tangible of the life they've created together, the world they've built around. It's almost like when you first start dating somebody and everyone's like, everything's new and flowers and unicorns, and then you've lived with them for like 2 decades and you've seen them do, it's like you've seen them in the bathroom and you've seen them in awkward places, but you still love them, and then it's a very different feel of love. It's almost like that. dichotomy between the two.
Yeah. Well, you know, on page 465, and this has to do with his relationship to his son. This is one of his dreams. He was in a room in Moscow facing a glass door locked with a key, which, to make sure, he also held shut by pulling the door handle towards him. Outside the door, his boy, Shirochka, in a child's coat, sailor's trousers, and hat, pretty and miserable, thrashed and wept, asking to be let in. Behind the child, showering him in the door with spray, was a roaring and rumbling waterfall, either from burst pipes, an everyday phenomenon of that epoch, or perhaps there really was some wild mountain gorge coming right up to the door. I mean, there's a lot of guilt there.
Right.
There's
I mean, paragraph lady says Yuri's heart was breaking. He
Yes.
wished with all his being to seize the boy in his arms, press him to his breast, and run off with him without looking back, you know, flooded with tears.
But that's not Tanya. That's his kid, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
he is
I
talking
mean,
about the boy, but he does.
No,
I
I
think-
understand. That's my point.
Yeah.
I'm saying, like, I don't. Where does Tanya factor into that? Is she in the background in the waterfall, or where? You know, like. So it sounds like, yeah, he's guilty that he's not being there as the father figure, but I'm not quite sure there's any guilty love there for Tanya in that dream sequence.
Well, I did it particularly, I did it mostly to just point out, or I cited it mostly to point out the guilt and to say that the guilt is not necessarily love. Right, that's all,
Yes.
or a certain depth of love. But you know, I mean, also think, you know, given the circumstances that all of them are in, it is pretty easy for us to make condemning statements when it's like, holy shit, what would I do in this, you know, in this circumstance, right? So I think, but I think it's you know, to me it's a really, it's a strength of the novel that characters are complicated enough for us to have trouble with them, you know, to have trouble either understanding them or recommending them or whatever.
You know, it's
Cannot wait for session 5, by the way. Just literally can't wait for session 5. Just want to let you know that.
It's like I've never read the book or seen the movie, but like this to me, where we are, does not feel like a love story to me, which I think is a good thing because I'm like the least sentimental person in the world. But like to me, this is a great story, and the love part is like a subplot. Like it's a couple of bits and a couple of chapters, and it's kind of always in the background, I guess. But to me, this feels like a war story, a history, that kind of thing. And it's just interesting that I've always this epic love story that transcends a continent. And to me, it's just the love story feels like a side quest, kind
I
of.
think that's definitely because of, if you've seen the movie took the love story, and the
Okay.
movie is really just the love story set against the background of different things going on that made it, for my generation, certainly, that everybody saw this movie like 50 times. It was like such a sweeping love story. And when I read the book, I was like, what happened to the love story? Like, you know, there's so much more going on here than the love story. And you're right, as you read the book, there's so much more to it, and so much more to think about. Whereas I think the great love story really came from the movie and the tagline for the movie, because everybody wanted Omar Sharif and Julie Christie to, you know, be happy forever. And we didn't care as much about Geraldine Chaplin when she got tossed at the end, you know, wasn't there.
Rachel, I feel the exact same way as you. I had not, before this GA thing, I had never read the book nor seen the movie. I've now finished the book, and I'm going to try to watch the movie before our next session. My husband wants to watch the movie with me too, because he's not sure if he ever watched it. But I'm very curious to see I mean, it's 653 pages.
Yep,
So
there's a lot not happening.
right. I'm very curious. Also, this has been tedious, but in a good way. I mean, this has been a lot of work, this book. Like, as I said, it's
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
beach with my pencil and my, this is not, a beach read in any way. So it'll be interesting. Is the movie just easier?
The movie's easier. I can
Oh,
tell you that right now.
absolutely.
The names alone,
Absolutely.
it's gotta be.
It'll be great because you'll recognize everything as you go through it, but it's so much easier. I was thinking the same thing. I've never read the book and I'm reading it as we're reading it here. And it is hard work. I'm in I'm in a Dickens and a Trollope group. And when I do the readings for those, I'm done in like a half an hour. I'm like, read, got that, know what I'm doing. I'm all set. This, I'm like poring over reading each section like 2 or 3 times.
And then looking stuff up on my phone.
Exactly.
I think because you read the book and then you're going to watch the movie, I almost say it's going to be things, but I do think that reading the book first and then watching the movie, it's still going to be work for
Mm.
The
sure.
book's work no matter what. The book is work. The movie's not any work at all.
That's what I mean. It'll be
The
interesting.
movie's easy.
agree.
All the
And
things
definitely
that
finish the
are hard
book.
Are going to be gone. That's
Definitely
it.
finish the book first before you watch the
Oh
movie.
yeah, you got to do that. Yeah.
It's,
You know,
it will
I
give
was-
you,
Takes out all the parts that I like and focuses
Right.
on the love story.
And well, it certainly dumped a ton of characters. I can tell you that.
I don't care about
Well, they had
people.
to. I mean,
you won't know the name of the village dogs.
That's right.
You
The
know, they leave
barks and
out the
make so much
part,
noise.
the parts about the trees and no, I mean, they do a great, one of my favorite parts
Usually
about the
beautiful.
movie is the cinematography.
Right.
Yes.
It's visually
Just-
stunning.
And they condense half the book into those amazing scenes.
Yeah.
So I think you'll find that. But yeah, the interpretations were so much. I'll call it focused on the love part that I'm like I'm so far I haven't seen 50% of that in the book. So it's
Cannot wait for session 5.
Yeah,
Can I say?
it's funny. My one of my past therapists used to call me Captain Guilt, and and I mean, so anyway, I was feeling guilty. I was telling Ginny,
We were
before
talking
we
about this,
started,
yeah.
I was saying, oh my God, this was too hard a book. This was too long. They don't like it. They're not telling me they don't like it, but this is, I should have thought of a better book that didn't require as much work, because it's a hell of a lot more work for everybody, for you guys, for me, and everything. But I guess you're letting
It's
me
worth
go.
it. It's worth it. Don't doubt it. It's worth it.
Yeah, I definitely
Yeah.
am glad I did it.
Me too.
Thank
For what
What
I
can I
was
just-
hoping to get
Yeah.
out of this, which once again, for me, the business type was, expanding my, thoughts and ideas in much broader directions. I'm getting 100% of that.
Excellent. How
And
about
I'd say
Derek?
I would say even books I don't like, I probably get more out of the books that I don't like, right? Don't they say like the people that you don't like, managers that you don't like are the ones you learn the most from? So first of all, I wouldn't change a thing about how this class is run, its format, or any of the content that you guys have picked out so far. It's all been extraordinary. But I think just because I don't think that would be, you should feel guilty in a bad way about anything, because I do think even books that move people the wrong way that you don't like, I think you still can learn a lot from them. And we certainly are.
And it was
For
most,
me.
I think most of it was like, well, I'm retired. You folks are not. Oh no, I guess, Charles, are you retired?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So you and I have, and
Me. I'm
yeah.
semi-retired.
Yeah, but we're, we
We have more time to read.
we have more time to read. So that's really where it's like.
Ginny's been retired for 15 years, by the way. And
Not that long. Only
she
seems like
also has read books I've known Ginny with her nose in a book since the beginning of my entire life. since
And
Day
way
one
before
of
that,
my
I'm all
life.
about reading. I have to say, to wrap up, I had to, I wrote this line down from the book in this section because Pasternak acknowledges his very own thing here. It was on page 373 where they're talking about this woman said, she's got more names than skirts. I don't know which one you want. They call her Kubarika, Medviakta, Sagarita, and a dozen more nicknames. She's not around anymore. I'm like, see, he admits these people have way too many names. I'm not the only one who wonders why Pasha has 8 names in the book that they call him by. So I had to say that before we wrapped up tonight because I was glad that Pasternak acknowledged people have too many names.
Okay, so lots of fun again. Let's see you next week.
See you next week for the
Thanks for all
conclusion.
of
All
it. Take
right,
care.
good night.
Bye all.
Bye.